already past the middle point of Yemei HaSvura, and today is Shiva ve'esrim Yoim. And we haven't even spoken about Sefiras this year, and it happens to be this week's Parsha, Haomer. Usefartem lachem memochas haShabbos sheva shavos oistimim oistiyano ad memochas haShabbos tisperu chamishim yoim. So it is only natural today, Sefiras Haomer. Specifically, women b'Sefiras Haomer. So as always, we start with the fundamentals, with the definitions, with the asaidas of the sugya, and we will speak halacha lemaisa. Kosav Rambam Perek Zayin halacha chof alaf Tamidin v'mesafim. Women are potter from Sefiras Haomer. Kesef Mishnah on the spot. Mitzvah sasei shazman groma. V'kach kosav Mogan Avrom Tov Peites Sif Koten Aleph. Women are exempt from Sefiras Haomer because there is a mitzvah sasei shazman groma. This mitzvah is relevant only a certain time of the year, and therefore noshim pturois. Big surprise. Ramban Kedushin Amedaled. The Ramban says even though the Mishnah, the Brisa bring only very few mitzvahs shazman groma ve'ein hazman groma tona v'shaya, there are many more. And the Rambam has a long list of mitzvahs that say shazman groma that women are exempt from, and a substantial list of mitzvahs that say she'ein hazman groma shenoshim chayavois. And it is a surprise to realize that the Rambam counts Sefiras Haomer amongst those mitzvahs she'ein hazman groma v'noshim chayavois. And it's a big pella. So I'll quote three different approaches from the Achronim. Divrei Malkiel, the Rav of Lamzha, one of the greatest poskim in Lithuania, Rav Malkiel Tenenbaum, Chele Gimel, Siman Hey, argues there is no such a Ramban. Cannot be, because it doesn't make sense. And he blames the Bochazetzer. Do you know who he was, the Bochazetzer? He lived 1,000 years, and he had many names. The Bochazetzer was the young Jewish boy that worked in the printing press. So printing once was a very complicated business profession. You need to assort the lead letters in the frame, and it was very common that mistakes were made. So the Divrei Malkiel speculates, maybe these two words, Sefiras Haomer, in the text of the Ramban, sank 2 lines. And they should have been amongst the mitzvahs that say shazman groma, and they dropped a line or two to mitzvahs that say she'ein hazman groma. Maybe. Maybe what was originally written in the Ramban was abbreviation, Rosh Tevis Samach Hei Ayin, and what the Ramban went was Seder Avoida Karbonis, or Mem Hei Ayin Matnas Aniyim, and the Bochazetzer thought he's going to do a huge favor for Klal Yisrael. He's going to open the Rosh Tevis. Samach Hei Ayin, he assumed, means Sefiras Haomer. Mem Hei Ayin, maybe the Mem became ultimately a Samach, and once again, it's a mistake, Sefiras Haomer. This approach is not very reasonable. We need to be very careful not to change Girsos just because we don't understand the Ramban. The Ramah and the Gra, Yoredei Reisha Test write very harsh words about people that change the Girsa just because they have a problem they don't understand. Approach number 2, Avnei Nezer, Orach Chaim Shin Pei Daled. Very unreasonable pshat. Avnei Nezer says, we have a big klal, kol sheyesh lo bebelto echol chometz yesh lo bekum echol matzah. And therefore women are chayiv in matzah, even though it says man groma. Not only matzah, moror, sipiyat siyasmaim, all the mitzvahs of Pesach. So maybe Korban Moimer and Sefiras Haomer would be defined as mitzvahs of Pesach, and therefore they too are included. And why do I say this is unreasonable? Gam Svora v'gam Gemara. Sefiras Haomer in no way is a mitzvah of Pesach. Not even Korban Moimer is. Sefiras Haomer starts second day Pesach, but it goes all the way to Shavuos. Very unreasonable to say it's a mitzvah of Pesach. But even if we would accept that svara, doesn't fit in with the Ramban. The Ramban clearly says, Noshom Chiyovas, because it's Ein Hazman Groma, according to Avnei Nezer, is Hazman Groma, but it's exerts because of Noshom Chiyovas. So this is also unreasonable. Divrei Cheskel, Reb Cheskel Borenstein, Rosh Hashiva in Slobodka, Siman Mem Hey. And the same svara we find by Rabbi Yerucham Fishel Perlo in his unbelievable Sefer HaMitzvos L'Rasag. The point they make is, Sefiras Haomer into itself is not Zman Groma. Sefiras Haomer starts with the Korban Omer. It is the Korban that's Zman Groma. And the Sefiras is just attached to the Korban. So actually what they're saying is, not every mitzvah that is confined to a certain time frame is considered Zman Groma. I would emphasize the word Groma. The Zman is the Goyim. It is only a mitzvah that the Torah ties into a certain time framework. Sefiras Haomer is not Zman Groma. It coincides with the Korban Omer. So recently, first time ever printed from Ksav Yad Tshuva from Reb Moshe Chalava. Reb Moshe Chalava was the son of the Maram Chalava, who was a Talmud of the Ramban. And Reb Moshe Chalava brings what his father wrote. That the opinion of the Ramban is, Mitzvah Asay She'ein Zman Groma Nosham Chayove. So first of all, that throws the Divrei Makil out of the window. A Talmud of the Ramban testifies, yes, this is the opinion of the Ramban. And he explains exactly the same svara as the Divrei Cheskel and the official Perlo in his commentary Sefer Mitzvos L'Rasag. And he also gives a moshel which is not very reasonable, and he says, would Berachas Hamazon be defined as man grama? Because in the middle of the week, it's not a chiyuv. You don't need to eat bread, so you don't need to say Berachas Hamazon. But Shabbos you have a chiyuv of Melech HaMishnah. So the only day of the week in which you're chayiv in Berachas Hamazon is Shabbos. Would that be considered, would that make Berachas Hamazon Mr. Seisha as man grama? Of course not. Because it's not Berachas Hamazon that's man grama, it is Lech HaMishnah that's man grama. And Lech HaMishnah necessitates Berachas Hamazon. Similar, it is the Korban Omer that's man grama, and Korban Omer necessitates Sefiras Haomer. Why do we say it's not a very powerful argument? Because Berachas Hamazon is a chiyuv every day. Yom v'laylo. If you eat pas, you're chayiv in Berachas Hamazon. So Berachas Hamazon is never Zman Groma. It is a chiyuv whenever. Yes, it's dependent on achilas pas. But why would it be Zman Groma? Unlike Sefiras Haomer, which never would be a chiyuv in any other time of the year. It is also arguable that the kesher between Berachas Hamazon and achilas pas is different than Korban Omer and Sefiras Haomer. Achilas pas necessitates Berachas Hamazon. Korban Omer doesn't necessitate Sefiras Haomer. They're two distinct and different mitzvahs, nothing to one with the other. It's just this man of Sevira comes after the Korban Omer. So my feeling is, Maram Chalava clearly says, yes, this is the opinion of the Ramban, but the svara, I don't think he quotes the svara in the name of the Ramban. I think it's his own svara to explain the Ramban. What difference does it make? To me personally, it makes a huge difference because I want to suggest a different pshat in the Ramban. So if the Ramban explains himself in one way, it's ridiculous for me to try to explain the shittas of the Ramban in another way. He is more of the Shmaitz, so we're learning his Torah. But if his Talmud explains the Ramban with a certain svara, it is legitimate maybe to suggest a different mahalach. So let me share with you my mahalach. It's extremely nuanced, but I'll try to explain it the best I can. Zman Groma is only a mitzvah in which the actual act or deed you could perform any time. It's just Gzeras HaKos of Din Torah. This is the time and no other. Let's take Lulav for an example. You could shake a Lulav Rosh Hashanah, Tu B'Shvat, Yom Kippur, Chanukah, anytime all year. But the Torah says the mitzvah of Lulav is Shivas Yimei HaChag no other time. Even Kiddush Hayom. You could say Kiddush Monday morning, you could say Kiddush Tuesday night. Saying Kiddush is merely exalting the Shabbos and saying Kodesh Baruch Hu is Mekadesh as a Shabbos. You could say that any time. But the mitzvah is Leil Shabbos and no other time. That is defined Zman Grama. Sefiras Haomer is not Zman Grama because Sefiras Haomer technically, not because of Gzeres, because of technically you cannot be Makayim any other time. Because the mitzvah is not just counting 49 days, it is counting a specific 49 days. You need to count the 49 days from Pesach to Atzeres. You cannot count days when they're not here, when they don't exist. You can never count these 49 days, these specific 49 days, in any other time of the year. Try to count Tet Zayin Nisan in Chodesh Adar, or in Tishrei, or in Cheshvan, or in Kislev. You need to count these days, and it's just impossible to count these days when they're not here, when they don't exist. That is not Zman Grama. So both according to my interpretation and the Maram Chalav's interpretation, the fundamental idea is not every mitzvah that is confined to a certain time is defined Zman Grama. Zman Grama is Grama. And it is possible that a mitzvah is relevant only a certain time, but it is not necessarily a Zman Grama. And I want to bring 3 examples. Bikurim. So there are Mishnayos that say women bring Bikurim as well as men. But Sefer HaChinuch Tzaddik Aleph says it's only the Rabbanan because Menatore women are exempt from Bikurim. Minchas Chinuch explains Zman Grama. Because you bring Bikurim Michag ad Chanukah. Not before and not after. However, the Turei Yavin, Megillah Daf Chof, he didn't see the Sefer HaChinuch. I don't think the Shagasari of the Turei Yavin ever quotes Sefer HaChinuch. Maybe he wasn't even familiar with the Sefer. And he assumes that Menatore Nosham Chayavois. And he asks, why isn't there a Zman Grama? And he answers, Zman Grama is only when it's Gzeres HaKosuf. But the reason She'ein Mevi'im Bikurim Ele Mechagad Chanukah, because Bikurim means to be the first fruit. And that is when the first fruit blossoms. That is when the first fruit is Ra'ui La'achila. So it's a technical reason, and that is not defined as Zman Grama. Number 2, Kiddush Levana. Mogen Avram Tov Chovov explains, why don't women say Kiddush Levana? Zman Grama. You could only say after Gimel Shleimim, Zayin Shleimim to Yud Alad B'Chodesh. After that you cannot say, so it's Zman Grama. Reb Shloime Kluger, both in his Tshuvas Elef L'Chos Shloime and in Chachma Shloime and Shechanoch, argues against the Mogen Avram, and he says the reason you can't say Kiddush Levana only half a month is because Haroy Levana B'Chidusha. After a half month, the Levana no longer is Mischadesh. It's static, and then it's diminished. Then it goes down and becomes smaller. That's a technicality. That is not defined as Zman Grama. Number 3, Birchas Ilonis. Haiman de Nofek B'Yoyme de Nisan. Repesh Pesach Frank Hartzvi Orachaim Chelek Aleph Kuf Yud Ches says it's not Zman Grama. And why not? Because the reason you only Makayim the Mitzvah Nisan is because that is when Ilanot Malov Lavim. That is when you see the flowers in the trees. That is when the trees start to blossom. It's a technicality. And he quotes the Turei Yavin. And I wonder against the Repesh Pesach Frank. Why doesn't he quote the Mogen Avram, who was more significant as a Pesach than the Turei Yavin? And the Mogen Avram says it is Zman Grama, Kiddush Levana. And I think Birchas Ilonis is mamish similar to Kiddush Levana, even more than to Bikurim. So, according to the Mogen Avram, it is Zman Grama and Noshim P'turis. So, this fundamental question is relevant by various different mitzvahs. That is number 1. Should Noshim actually say Kiddush Levana? Mogen Avram says, Shaviu Olai Choiva. They took upon themselves, and therefore, in our time, women are chayev in Sefiras Haomer. We won't have time today to discuss the concept of Shaviu Olai Choiva. I wrote about this in great length in several of my Sforim. Not for today. But the Mishnah Berurah writes, Siv Kotten Gimel Tov Peites, that in our Medina, women don't say Sefiras Haomer. And then he quotes Shulchan Shloim. A woman should not say Sefiras Oima with a bracha for two different reasons. Well, it is clear that someday down the line they're going to make a mistake, and it's going to be a bracha levatala. The other reason is they don't understand what they're saying, and if you don't understand, it's not considered Sefira, it's not considered counting. Who was the Shulchan Shloim? He was the Rav of Mir, before Mir was really the Mir, Reb Shlomo Zalman. His sefer was printed more than 260 years ago. Tav Kuf Chof Aleph. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes him. But I think the Mishnah Berurah and the Shulchan Shloim are totally irrelevant today. Not that I go against them, but they're not relevant because for hundreds of years not much changed in the Jewish world. And just like in the days of the Shulchan Shloim and the Mir, in the days of the Chofetz Chaim and Radin, most women were very ignorant. They spoke Yiddish, maybe other languages, but they weren't fluent in Lashon Kodesh. So many of them didn't understand what they're saying. And they also were not very learned. But our wives and our daughters that go to Beis Yaakov, they understand very well. And there's no reason to assume they're going to make a mistake. And I don't even know what the Shulchan Shloim means they're going to make a mistake. He doesn't say they might forget, but rather they're going to make a mistake. What would that mistake be? Maybe counting the wrong day. But today, there's no reason to assume a woman would count the wrong day. They're intelligent, they're up to date. If you have any cell phone, you could get 100 reminders to remind you about Sefiras Oima and what day it is. So in our day and age, I don't see any reason women should not say Sefiras Oima with a bracha. Well, it's needless to say, Ashkenazim with a bracha, Sfaradim without a bracha, because the Beis Yosef paskins by all the mitzvah seishas mangrama that women don't say a bracha. So Benot Sfarad don't say a bracha neither on Sukkah nor on Lulav. Same would apply to Sefiras Oima, but Ashkenazi woman definitely could say a bracha. Some present-day poskim, maybe the Mekabolim, not really the poskim, argue that women should not count Sfira al pi Kabbalah. So let me address this question briefly, very briefly. So the Zohar Kodesh twice, Parshas Tetzav and Parshas Emor, this week's Parsha says that women are exempt from Sefiras Oima because Sefiras Oima comes from Alme de Duchra, not Alme de Nukba. These are Kabbalistic concepts. There's a world of Zohar and a world of Nekeva. And Sefiras Oima belongs to the Zohar world, to the male and not to the female. And that's why they're not mechuyev. The Riyah Kodesh, Shara Kavona says the same, and he includes tzitzis and tefillin together with Sefiras Oima. Shalas Yeshuva Soid Yeshorim from the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai was an amazing gadol, Benigla u Benistar. His shuvas Benigla are called Rav Pa'olim, and the Kabbalistic shuvas are Soid Yeshorim. Soid Yeshorim Simen Yud Beis. Rav Pa'olim relates to the Zohar and the Ari, and he says, well, it is very common that al pi halacha there is one reasoning and al pi Kabbalah another. Doesn't necessarily make a difference. But then he says, maybe it does make a difference. Why do the Kabbalists need to explain another reason why women are exempt from Sefiras Oima? And why don't they simply say, like the Mishnah, like the Gemara, Mitzvah Sheishes Mangrom and Oshim P'turos? They come to teach us, even though all the other Mitzvah Sheishes Mangrom, a woman, are not mechuyev, but they still could. They could even make a bracha if they're Ashkenaz. Because even if you're not obliged, but you still are permitted. However, by these three mitzvahs, women are prohibited. They should not, because it doesn't belong to them. So that's only one of the two interpretations of the Ben Ish Chai, and I wonder, it is very common that the Bala Kabbalah suggests different rationale, and they don't mean to change the halacha at all. The lashon of the Zohar is noshim p'turos ve'enam chayavois. It's not indicated that they do something wrong if they count Sfira. I just want to give an example. The Zohar in Parshas Pinchas says that the Bavlim don't even know why there are 2 days in Rosh Hashanah. Because the Gemara says Sveika D'Yom, and the Zohar says why? They don't know that it's Dina Kashya and Dina Rafia. And then the Zohar goes on to say that the Bavalim, the Babylonians, also don't know why we have Shvora and Trua. And they think it's a suffix. It's not a suffix at all. It's Dina Kasha and Dina Rafia. Does the Zohar intend to change the halachas? Not at all. He just explains in a different way what halacha explains in one way. And this is very common. Now, who am I to argue against the Ben Ish Chai? But I have two big supporters. Kaf HaChaim. Kaf HaChaim was a contemporary of the Ben Ish Chai. He too was a giant in halacha and Kabbalah. Kaf HaChaim Tov Peitas Ostes quotes the Zohar, quotes the Ari. And Toich Kadei Dibber, in the very same paragraph, he says, so Ashkenazi woman could count with a brocha, and Sephardi woman, and this is a chiddush, a chumrah, they should hear the brocha from an Ashkenazi, and then they should count themselves. So the Ben Ish Chai sees no contradiction whatsoever between the Zohar and the halacha, that a woman could say Sefiras Haomer, no contradiction at all. Lo kedivrei Soid Yishorim. Even more convincing, the Mogan Avraham himself. He is the one that says, Nosham Ptureis Mitzvah Seishas Mangromim. And he quotes two sources, the Rambam and the Zohar. Quotes the Rambam and the Zohar together. And then he says, Shaviu alai choivo. Bisman hazeh Nosham ar chayiv. So the Mogan Avraham also saw no contradiction between the Rambam and the Zohar. And he saw no reason, even though he quotes the Zohar, he saw no reason to say that women should not count. To the contrary, he says, Kibul and they're machuyev. So there's no reason al pi Kabbalah that women should not count Sefira. Hanach lehem lebnei Yisrael. Em lo neviim hem, bnei neviim hem, v'bnois neviim hem. And the minhag nowadays is that women count. However, yesh la'ayin, if a woman has her own track record and she knows that a year ago and 2 years ago and 3 years ago and 4 years ago, she always skipped a day and she never finished the count, would it be wiser she shouldn't start counting with a brocha at all? Well, that's a sensible argument. If we're dealing with a male, with a man, even though he knows for 10 years he wasn't mashlam the Sefira, that's not a problem. Cannot be a problem because Berachas mitzvah is a chiyuv. It's mandatory. It's not voluntary. Person counts without a brocha, he's an avariyan. He was mevatel a mitzvah seder rabbanon. So a man doesn't have the liberty to decide, will I say a brocha, won't I say a brocha, you're mechuyev to say a brocha. But women are potter from Sefiras Haomer. Goes without saying, they're potter from the brocha. And if she knows that in all probability she'll skip a day, brings us to a big question. Sheikh Hanoch is choishish to the shit of halachas gedolos. Halachas gedolos maintains if you skip one day, you no longer have a mitzvah. And the Achronim deal with the question, if you skip one day, does that mean that the days you already counted with a brocha, lemafreya, becomes a brocha lavatola? Or that the problem is only mekanu lahabo? If we say it's a brocha lavatola lemafreya, maybe a woman should not start counting with a brocha because she knows in all probability that she's accumulating a lot of brochas lavatola. I think this question, is it a brocha lavatola lemafreya, depends. What is the reasoning of the halachas gedolos? Sefer HaChinuch is the only one of the Rishonim, Shinavov, that says all the Memtes Yomam are one mitzvah. So if you skipped one day, you don't have the mitzvah. Shuvas al-Bach writes the same, but he was later generations. All the other Rishonim, starting off with Toises Menochas Samach Vav Medalef, the Ramban, the Ritva, the Ran, and the Rosh at the end of Masechet Pesachim, they all quote the halachas gedolos with a different rationale. Tamimois. A new interpretation of Tamimois. Tamimois means a total count of 49 days. So if we say it's one mitzvah, it goes without saying, if you skipped one day, you have nothing, and all the brochas are lavatola lemafreya. However, if it's just a din of Tamimois, it's reasonable to argue the problem is only after you skip a day. You cannot count 30 if you're missing 29. You cannot count 40 if you're missing 39. But as long as you count consecutively, day after day, you are Mekayim the mitzvah. And it's not a bracha v'torah mafreya. So, Minchas Shamoyedem Chele Gimel, I strongly voiced my opinion. I do not think it's a bracha v'torah mafreya. And therefore, I think a woman that, based on a track record, most of the years skips a day. She's not mechuyev to say a bracha. She's never mechuyev to say a bracha. She's never mechuyev to count. But if she wishes, she could say a bracha because it's a svek, sveika. Suffix number one, who says she's going to skip a day. She's going to do her best to be really vigilant and do her best not to skip a day and count every night. It's not more than a suffix. The entire psak of the Halachas Gedolos is a suffix. The Mechaber doesn't paskin according to the Halachas Gedolos. He's choishish only legabe brocha. And therefore he says, person skipped a day, he should continue to count, but without a brocha. So that's suffix number two. Suffix number three, is it a brocha levatorah lemafreya or only makan or lahaba? And in this question, once again, I strongly lean and feel it's not a bracha levatorah lemafreya. And therefore, svek lechiyuv, woman could count with a bracha. So today we spoke about women in Sefiras Haomer. Let me share with you some thoughts generally about Sefiras Haomer, especially Lag BaOmer, which is next week. Yemei Sefiras was supposed to be joyous days, one long festival. The Ramban Torah explains that the days between Pesach and Atzeres, 49 days, are similar to the days between Chag and Atzeres, 7 days. We should have had 49 days of Chol HaMoed. But these days were tragically transformed. When 24,000 disciples of Rebbe Kiva perished in a very short period, it's not only 49,000 people, it's an entire generation of Gedolei Torah, the Talmidim of Rebbe Kiva. And that is why we're noig minhag avelos. Lo inagu kovod zeh bezeh. And many ask, such a terrible punishment for what? Chayiv misa b'dei shemayim, chayiv koras. Lo inagu kovod zeh bezeh. Is that an issa d'oraisa? Why such a harsh punishment? Two different explanations, and I like the combination of the two. Rebbe Kiva was an integral link in the Shersheres HaMesorah, Matikei Hashmua. He was the Gadol Hador. His Talmidim were destined to be the next link of Matikei Hashmua, Manchilei Moirosha, Shersheres HaMesorah. But their Torah needs to be Mezukak Shevasayim. It needs to be pure. It needs to be holy. If they were Noya Kovod Zeh Bezeh, they weren't fitting to be Matikei Hashmua. They had to leave the stage and make room for others that would be better than them. In Koheles Rabbah, the story is told, as well as Yevamah Samach Beis. Hoy hu olam shomem at shabur Rebbe Kiva etzel Rabbeinu shebedoram v'shono lahem. And in Koheles we find Rebbe Kiva pleads and begs his later Talmidim, the greatest Tanoim, tells them of the tragedy that befell him, and he asks them, Atam al tihu kemoisam, be better. Minchas Sichas Moedem Chele Gimel. I wrote an amazing siman. And I brought sources, Rabbi Seinu Shebedorim, the greatest of Tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda bar Elor, Rabbi Meir ben Anes, Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta, Rabbi Shimon ben Yechoy, Rabbi Loza ben Shemua. Each of them was a paragon in Avos Reim and Kvoid Chaverim, a symbol. And I quoted many Mamor Chazal. It's kedai to look it up. Point number 2, being a Talmud of a giant, it's not only a privilege, it's an awesome responsibility as well. Story I heard many times from my great Rebbe, the Kloiser Rebbe, one of his earliest recollections. I was a child sitting in my great father's lap. The father of the Kloiser Rebbe was the Rudniker Rav. And he was crying, and I asked him, Abba, Tati, why are you crying? I envy you. Ich bin dich mekane. And I asked him, you envy me, I should envy you. You're a big Rebbe with a lot of Hasidim, I'm a little boy. I envy you because you didn't see the Divrei Chaim. And I was perplexed, and I asked him once again, I should be envying you because you are Mishamish at the great Divrei Chaim. And my father said, you didn't see the Divrei Chaim, so what could they demand from you after 120? But they'll ask me, you saw the Divrei Chaim, and this is who you are? You learn nothing from him? And he was crying. Being a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva is a responsibility. And those 24,000 Talmidim Shaloi Nago Kovet Zebeze were asked Men HaShamayim, did you learn nothing from your great Rebbe? Where were you when he said, the Dorom Daflamed Yerushalmi, Ze Klal Godel B'Toira V'Yahavtu L'Reachu Kamoicho? Where were you when Rabbi Akiva said, Es Hashem Elokecho Tiro L'Rabbis Talmidei Chachomim? And weren't you present when he said in Perek Gimel Masechet Avos, Chovav Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem Chibi Yoseiran and Aslu Shenivra B'Tzelem Elakim? You call yourself Talmidei Rabbi Akiva and you learned nothing from your great Rebbe. So yes, they needed to perish and make room for Rabbi Seinu Shebedori. So the Shulchan Aruch writes in Tov Tzadik Gimel, Lag BaOmer is a day of Simcha. Mipnei she'omrim she'posku melamus. It is said that at this day the plague was over and death was over. Why? My feeling is this. It is well known from Rebbe Soa Salanter, and before him the Chidush Harim, and before both of them the Maharal. 49 days of Sefira coincide with Memches Kinyonei Torah, Perek Vav Masechet Avos. Chidush Harim and Rebbe Soa Salanter demanded from their Hasidim, from their Talmidim, work on your midas. Every day, another Kinyon of Kinyonei Torah. So if you count from number 1, number 32 is Oyeves Abrios. So my feeling would be, the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva knew what the Talmidim of Rabbi Soa Salanter and the Chassidim of the Chidush Harim knew. And they also worked each day in another midah. Day 30 knew. Day 32 they invested energy and effort in Ahavas Abrios. Day 33, it was all over. So each and every year when this time comes, we need to invest. Work on Ahavas Reim, Kavoid Chaverim, because we know in our Messiah, in the Jewish calendar, the past has never passed. The past accompanies us. The past is always present in a way. So every year, in these days of Sefira, in these days of mourning, in these days of sadness, we need to work. And Kavoid Reim, and especially Kavoid Chachomim, to be metaken, the terrible Gzeira, the plague of Kula Meisu ben Pesach Latzeres Sheloi Nahagu Kavoid Zeh B'Zeh. So this is something we need to work on. And it's something we desperately need. More Ahavas Chaverim. And especially more Kvoid Chaverim and Kvoid Chachomim. Yerotzon Shiach Elkeinu Emoim. Have a beautiful day. B'Soyres Tovis. Shenaskel Abiyas Agoyel B'Meheru V'Yomeinu.